Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to this second community call in June. My name is Mark Fussell. I'm a maintainer and I'll be your host today. And in this call, we have two tremendous topics we're going to deep dive into. We're going to start off with Mauricio, who's going to talk a lot about Dapr and test containers and bring those two worlds together and show how that they can bring a development world and a Dapr world and show you incredible things that you can do and build things locally. And then we're going to have Yaron, who's going to spend some time on looking at our 1.12 planning and some of what's happening inside the upcoming release. We did 1.11 release a couple of weeks ago, and just after we paused 1.11, we had to go into the planning for the next phase. And so it's a time for you to kind of understand what's happening inside it all and to reflect on what's important to you and to kind of give some of your input to this. And then I'll finish up and do a little bit of community show and tell about some things that have been happening inside the community. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Mauricio, and that you can take it away.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I share my screen, right? Yes, let's do it. All right. Thank you everyone for joining. Let's see if I can pop up my presentation here. So as Mark mentioned, my name is Mauricio Salatino. I'm working for Diagrid. I am working on the open source side of things, and I am relatively new to Dapr, but I've been working with Kubernetes for some time now, more than 6 years. And my background is mostly like Java developer. I was like long-term Java developer since after university. I worked building Java applications, Java frameworks. And then when I started working with Kubernetes, I started doing more Go and development with that, right? So because I worked in the Java community for some time, I actually was aware of this project TestContainers. And when I joined Dapr, I started kind of like working a lot with Dapr running on Kubernetes. But then when I was looking into Java frameworks and how to use Dapr with Java frameworks, I remembered about this project. Also, a coworker also mentioned, this project that I should look into it more deeply. And then I realized that TestContainers is now not only Java, like a Java project, but a multi-polyglot project that supports different tech stacks, including Go, .NET, Python, Ruby, Haskell, and a bunch of other things. So I decided to take a look into how we can integrate better with Dapr, and also how to kind of reduce the gap for local development, which is something that, at least as a Java developer, when I looked into Dapr, I kind of understood how to work with it. But I think that we can get even closer to what Java developers are used to do. And I think that we can do the same for other communities. So let me get started. The topic of the integration, I think that when I started working with Dapr, I realized that, okay, there's the Dapr CLI, which is great. I love the Dapr CLI. But as a developer who is already using some other frameworks, in the Java world, you have Spring Boot, you have Quarkus, a bunch of frameworks that they kind of like approach how to create new applications, how to maintain and how to run applications differently. The Dapr CLI was one more thing that I needed to learn, and it will actually behave in a way that it's very Dapr focused, which is fine because that's kind of why the CLI was created. But when you wanted to integrate with other tools in the ecosystem, it becomes a little bit of your problem now. Now you need to figure out how to do that integration. I had some other experiences with teams basically creating their own Docker Compose files. And now I know that we have a way to, start Dapr with Docker Compose specifically, which is great. And that's something that I also looked into when I started like working with Spring Boot or some Java frameworks. And then the problem with my background is that I've been working for the last 6 years heavily on top of Kubernetes. So I'm really used to work on a Kubernetes cluster. Most of the time when I want to develop something, even like a simple application, I create a cluster and then I deploy the application to the cluster. But there are some developers still and developers are large organizations that don't want to train everyone to learn how to use Kubernetes. And also they realize that, pushing everyone to learn how to use Kubernetes might be way too much. And if they can make their developers' life simpler, that's better, right? Like you need to do less training, you need to know less things just to build business value. And I think that that's kind of like the last question there. Like maybe you want to use Dapr for your development lifecycle when you're building a small application or a couple of applications, but you don't want to use Kubernetes. So you're kind of like in some way forced to figure out how are you going to bootstrap Dapr locally. And if you can make that simple for developers, adopting Dapr and making sure that developers understand the value of Dapr, is something that it's much easier to sell. So we all know how Dapr work on Kubernetes, right? Like we are injecting sidecars right besides our applications, and then with those sidecars we can configure Dapr components or resiliency policies, and we will enable these applications to communicate no matter which languages and frameworks are being used to build these applications. That's kind of like how it works if you install the Dapr control plane on a Kubernetes cluster. And since I kind of like understand this already, and I know that this is a Dapr community call, I will not explain how Dapr works. But the only thing that I wanted to show with this image is that if we are thinking about running our applications locally, we will need to make sure that we provide a Dapr configuration, like a Dapr sidecar that will run besides your application, plus a bunch of configurations for Dapr components that these applications will want to use. From what I understand, and I do not know the entire history of the Dapr CLI, but the Dapr CLI by default comes with the basic setup that allows developers to get started, right? Like you will start a state store and it pops up just automatically for developers to just go ahead and use those APIs, which I think it's a great experience, right? Like I wanted to get the same thing for Java or Go or .NET developers, but without introducing kind of like the CLI aspect of it. I wanted to make it more native to the tools that they were using. So I decided to create a very simple application using the state store and PubSub API, using databases and message brokers to store data, read data, and then subscribe to notifications. And to make it a little bit more colorful, I created a front-end application that it's using service-to-service invocation to access all these backend services. And let me show you that application is something that I think that I've shown before in this call, but let me quickly go over what the application is doing. The application is pretty simple. It has 3 services, as I showed before. One that writes information to the state store API, one that reads information from the state store API, and then here at the bottom, we can get the asynchronous notifications that it's basically using PubSub, right? This is running on my Kubernetes cluster. I can just execute, store something, and I should get notifications down here, right? Again, this is installed already on my Kubernetes cluster, and this application is just a bunch of pods running there, and I'm using Redis for both the state store and the PubSub implementation here. So I have a couple of components. Yes, questions? No? Cool.
No questions.
So I have no questions. Good. I just heard a noise, but yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. I'm just showing kind of like this simple application just to be able to just show the kind of like more the local developer experience there. So 2 components here, one PubSub, one state store, 3 services, using these APIs, and a front-end application, which is basically interacting with all these backend services. Go back to the presentation here. So I decided to build this application in multiple languages. I wanted to build the same thing using Spring Boot in Java and using Go, right? So I have different implementations of the same services just to understand, the differences in experiences. And I created this repository here, Dapr TestContainers, to show kind of like some of this application in action. In this repository, I only have the Java versions, but I'm adding the Go versions as well. They work in the same way. But what I wanted to show today is the integration with Spring Boot. Again, this is a framework in Java that it's focused on allowing developers to create quickly microservices, right? Like you can create a simple project that has the bare minimum to create REST endpoints and then interact with the infrastructure if you need to. So I created these projects, all the backend projects using Spring Boot, and we can actually take a look into that. So if you're not familiar with Spring Boot or with the Java ecosystem, we use a tool called Maven or Gradle for building our projects. And I can show you, for example, the read application. This is a very, very simple application, extremely simple, I would say, that it's using the Dapr SDK and the Spring Boot Dapr SDK integration to be able to create the Dapr client. So we can actually use the Dapr APIs. And here I'm just using the get state, API, just to go and read some values from the state store, right? This is the most simple Java application that you can create, and we're using this annotation to basically expose a REST endpoint that people can call to this application and actually interact with that. Now, the problem with this application, I created the application like as it is. I created a container of this application and I deployed it to a Kubernetes cluster, and it kind of works because Dapr is there. the sidecar will get injected and everything is fine. The problem that you will face is that if you want to test this application locally in a unit test, it gets kind of hard because you need Dapr in order to test it. You need Dapr in order to make sure that you can call this Dapr API. And you can do a bunch of different things. You can actually mock Dapr. That would be one option. But that's why I thought that TestContainers, it's kind of like a great tool that will allow me to test this actually using Dapr and bootstrapping all the components and the components dependencies like a Redis instance for me, kind of like in a very like Java and Spring Boot way. So that's why I took a look at TestContainers. Again, it was a project that I knew from the Java community. It was started in the Java side, but now they adopted more languages and they provide SDKs and tooling for multiple tech stacks, which is kind of great. At the beginning, I was very reluctant to go with TestContainers, mostly because I thought that it was purely Java, so it will not map to other languages. But now that I do that, they expanded to other communities, I think that it's kind of like a great solution. So with TestContainers, what you can do is you can run kind of like unit tests, or at least this is what it was designed originally for, running unit tests with real dependencies. So it will basically give me a bunch of APIs for me to start the things that I need to run my tests, right? And they are kind of like on that mission, right? Like as soon as you have access to a Docker daemon, you can actually start any containers that you need to run your tests. But this is a little bit different than Docker Compose. With Docker Compose, you do Docker Compose app, and you will actually start all the containers that are defined in your Docker Compose file. But that's usually not enough for running all your unit tests because you might need to have different configurations depending on what you are testing. And that will push you to have different Docker Compose files with different values, and it gets a little bit messy pretty fast. Also, what TestContainers does is that it will take care of the life cycle of those containers, right? You can define actually when do you want to start the containers for the test to run, and then when those containers needs to be cleaned up and maybe restarted again for another batch of tests. That also allows you to create different instances in parallel to run tests in parallel in your CI systems, which is pretty interesting. And most of the time it's pretty useful. If you need to coordinate that using Docker Compose files, it becomes a mess quite quickly. So if you go to their website, testcontainers.com, you will see that they provide kind of like a very basic API to define what that configuration is. So in this case, you can see here that they have something called generic container for Go and for Java. That basically, in this case, they are starting a Redis instance, basically. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to start containers where you said, okay, I'm interested in using, for example, this port, 6379, which is the Redis port, but they will randomize that port and they will actually give you a variable, in this case, the Redis variable here or the container variable here, which will contain which is the actual port where that container is exposed. So your application or your test can connect to that URL. It's pretty interesting. And again, this is going to be started and it's going to be maintained running for the, for the test suite that you're running. And if you have multiple of those, you can actually restart and, and recreate these environments for other batch or other tests as well. Again, it supports multiple languages and it's not 100% feature parity across all the tech stacks, but they are getting there because they are getting a lot of users trying this out for their systems, which is kind of nice. And on top of this, they offer kind of like a cloud offering, which basically allows you to run these containers that you're starting in their hardware, like in their compute. Instead of you running it locally, they will just run it remotely, which is pretty nice. And it's pretty transparent, right? Like you feel that you're running it locally, but it's actually running on their servers. This is kind of like how they explain TestContainers. I did a webinar yesterday. I think that the recording can be there in the chat. I will paste the link there. But yeah, so they offer kind of like these abstractions, and I think that the one that interests me the most is these complex network topologies, which basically is another way of saying that you can create actually very complicated setups of containers and how they are wired together for your applications to connect to. I think that that's pretty important. And the next one as well, like the one that I mentioned before, randomized port mappings, which is, again, you can start multiple instances of your containers and they will do the randomization of the ports and then give you variables so your applications can connect to those random ports that are created dynamically. And that allows a lot of parallelization and also allows a lot of different PI kind of like scenarios, which is kind of like interesting. And again, the idea here is just to make, like your tests more realistic, because they are going to be using, kind of like the real thing, like a real Redis instance instead of a mock Redis. And in this case, for our community call, like a real Dapr D sidecar. So for the application that I was showing before, that I had like 3 backend services, 3 backend like Spring Boot applications that are running. What we did with the test container folks is creating some sort of integration between Dapr, so providing some Dapr configurations, some Dapr basic configurations that will start, the Dapr the sidecar, plus whatever we decide to start, like as a Redis instance or Kafka if you want to provide like PubSub and state store API implementations. And I wanted to make sure that I showed something that usually if you go to Spring Boot or Java conferences, you will not see, which is like running multiple applications at the same time without dealing with all the pain of mapping different ports. And the applications will be running in different ports, but all the infrastructure and all the configuration for running that infrastructure will be actually managed by test containers. And more importantly, because these applications need to interact using Dapr, we want to make sure that the infrastructure between these 3 applications is shared across all of them, right? We don't want to create one instance of the entire Dapr infrastructure for one application that doesn't talk to the other application, that doesn't talk to the other application, right? Because we wanted to be coding these 3 services at the same time, and we want to see if they are interacting correctly, if they are receiving the right data, and if they are, working as expected. So that's kind of like what I built here. We can take a look at the application. So the same application that I was showing before, the read application that I created a container and deployed to Kubernetes. And now what I've done here for the test side of things, I created here something that's called common containers. And this is where we define what we need in order to have Dapr available for our application. So you can see here, I created kind of like a Docker network, because I need to make sure that all my containers are in the same Docker network so they can talk to each other. And then basically I define that I want to start Redis. I will be using Redis for PubSub and for the state store API. And then for my application, in this case, the read application, I want to start, Dapr D right beside my application. And I'm setting the app ID. This is the read application. So that's why we are using that application ID. And then I'm reading my components definition here also from the test resources. And in this case, the read application only needs a state store, right? Again, it's Redis, and I'm using the, this Redis host that test containers is actually doing the mapping for me with that container, with that port in this case. So it's reading that, it's mapping, the port of that Redis instance to a port that Dapr can understand, and it's setting up all these configurations for me. And I'm starting the placement server just to simulate that I have some other things up and running there. So by creating this configuration, which in this case I've created inside this application, but what we're working on is to create like a generic getting started experience for Spring Boot users into Dapr. So usually this should be something that you don't even need to define in your application. Whenever you start your application and include certain dependencies, you will have a default configuration that you can, of course, extend later on. And I created a simple test in here. Where is it? Well, it's not in this application. It's in a different application. But imagine that I have a test here. Let me see. I should have a test in the right application, which is pretty much the same. If I have a test that it's using the Dapr APIs, because my application is using the Dapr APIs, I should be able to just run that test. Yeah, take a look at this one. This is just interacting with the application endpoints for writing data into the state store and checking that the values have been stored. And this is using the same common containers configuration, which basically is making sure that it's starting the Dapr sidecar right beside my application. But something that we can do since like one of the latest releases of Spring Boot is we can use this test configuration to also run the application in development mode locally, right? So what I will do here in my terminal, and I'm here now in my read application, what I will do is like before, I need to check this, yeah. Before starting my application, I can start my application in kind of like a new mode that it's called test run, which basically is going to start my application using the test configuration. in this way that I'm starting the application, it's basically going to bootstrap my application with the endpoints that the application is exposing, but it's also going to start, as you can see, it's downloading some, some containers, container images and the Dapr container there to actually start the Dapr sidecar right beside my application. And again, because I'm starting a Dapr sidecar here, I'm starting also a Redis instance and the placement server, I think. I just want to make sure that now if I start my write application, it can actually reuse that infrastructure. It will not recreate its own version of Redis and its own version of all the other things that we are starting, but it's actually, in this case, starting a Dapr with, with the application ID, in this case, write application. And it's reusing all the infrastructure, the Redis state store, and all the other Dapr components that we want to create there for this application. So I've started the read application, I've started the write application, and now I'm starting the subscriber, the one that it's using PubSub in this case. So as you can imagine, because I'm using PubSub, and this is the consumer side of things, my write application is writing a new message into the PubSub API every time that I'm storing any data. This application, the subscriber application, actually is just exposing an HTTP endpoint where the subscription is going to be sent, right? We can take a look at here in the resources. I have components, and this application, whenever I'm starting Dapr, I'm also, adding the subscription definition here. So my subscriber app can get notifications that are going to be created by the write app that I can show here. A very simple use of the, state API to get state here and then add state, save state, and then publish an event whenever I'm saving something. So now the subscriber app can get that state. But again, now I'm running everything locally. There is no Kubernetes involved. And for every application that I've started, in this case, every Spring Boot application, the Dapr configuration is being kickstarted, and all the infrastructure that it's being created, except the Dapr sidecar that is created one per application, is being shared. So now I can come here and I can, for example, do some HTTP requests, right? Like this is calling the read application. I haven't write anything yet, so there is nothing there. But if I send a hello world message to the write application that it's hosted in port 8081, I'm getting feedback saying, okay, I've just stored that. If I call this, I can see that my read application is also getting the values. And if I go to the terminal here, I can see that my subscriber application also received a message whenever the write application receives something, whenever it writes it to the state store. But I can also go to the port 8082, I think, and yeah, I just get notifications here, right? So I'm just showing the same kind of like endpoints that are being used in my application via the front end here, like the application that is running in Kubernetes. But now I'm running the same services more like in development mode, when I'm actually developing things without the need of me worrying about containers, without the need of worrying about sharing infrastructure, and without the need of thinking about, okay, how do I start my Dapr sidecar right beside my application? We can make it much more easier. And the good thing is that I'm kickstarting some work also with Go, just to make sure that we have similar configurations for Go, and I'm pretty sure that we can do the same for .NET and for other frameworks as well. So I am really looking forward to get some feedback. The repository here that I've shared, this repository, Salavoid Dapr TestContainers, has basically a step-by-step tutorial to run exactly the same thing that I'm running here, like a copy in Kubernetes, like the application running in Kubernetes, plus the application running locally for development mode using Spring Boot in this case. So if you're interested to give it a try and find issues or ask for more features or some other examples that you might want to see, feel free to reach out. I would love to get, for example, workflows working in this kind of stuff. But yeah, that's what I have for today.
Fantastic, Mauricio. Let's open up for if anyone has any questions that they want to ask. I think, Peter, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm wondering if if the test containers platform, if that'll work inside of an Azure DevOps pipeline.
I think so. You're asking if it works or if I know if it works.
I don't know, just a hunch maybe. I'm curious if it works because I
Yeah,
would want to try it as a part of a pipeline, run some kind of integration tests.
100%. Yeah, 100% because it was designed for that. And the good thing is that, yeah, like it will actually work if you have access to a Docker daemon, right? Like if you can connect to a Docker daemon, it will work.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
It is compatible with any kind of, if you have a Docker daemon, it will work because it's basically using that. It's using the same APIs to start containers and doing all that stuff.
Okay. Awesome. It's good stuff.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Mauricio. That's fantastic. As I say, he'll post his resources inside there. And you can dive into those afterwards. So with that, let's move on to our next speaker and Yaron.
I'm gonna share my screen immediately. Just a sec. All right, let me know if you can see it.
We can see it.
Okay, good. So today we're going to cover some of the upcoming features and things related to the Dapr 1.12 release. We always do that at the beginning of a new milestone. So there's a few things I'd like to talk about today to just clarify a few things for anyone who's thinking about contributing to the milestone, or maybe even being part of the release team. We still have a build manager role that we want to fill in. So first of all, this is the release team for 1.12. You can reach us on GitHub if you have any specific questions on a GitHub issue, or those are also our Discord handles, I think. But you can find all of these folks here, part of the release team on Discord. So if at any point during the milestone you have any questions for the release team about anything really, milestone dates, PRs, your contributions, please reach out to that group of people. Now, let's go over some of the milestone dates, because this is important to anyone who's planning to open a PR or an issue for Dapr, or if you have an issue that you're waiting for and you want to know if it's gonna get in. So we have something called the feature definition stage, which is where we triage items into the release. And feature definition is basically features, not necessarily bugs, but big outstanding feature items that can include changes to the Dapr APIs, additions to existing APIs, specification changes, new components. So that started June 19th and it ends on June 30th, which means that major features will not be added to the milestone after that. The next milestone date is feature freeze. Now, this is actually a code freeze. So on August 1st, we will not be accepting PRs that target any features for the Dapr release, which means that PRs for bugs, for example, or improvements or enhancement to existing features can actually go in. That's, of course, advised on maintainer discretion. But if any major feature that was identified that went in during the feature definition stage needs to have a PR outstanding in Dapr by August 1st. Next date is code freeze. That is actually a complete code freeze for the entire project, bugs, features, you name it, unless it's P0 bugs. We'll try not to merge PRs after that. And that date is August 14th, and it's tentative. Well, all of these dates actually, I think, are tentative, but yeah, we just put it on here. This is to allow for 3 weeks stabilization period. And what we mean by stabilization is in that period of time, we run performance tests, long haul tests. We make sure that there are no regressions in performance or features, no APIs have been broken. That's what we're trying to validate. Then comes this thing, the release day. And if you're a member of the release team, this can either be the happiest day of the year or the saddest day of the year for you. So if everything goes well, you will generally be a very happy person on that day. You will rejoice, you will hug the person next to you, you'll go out on the porch and drink a beer or whatever it is that you like to drink and do. Whatever it is that really makes you happy. But if we discover P0s on release day, usually that day turns into a really sad day and you're in for a ride in hell. But usually it all ends in a very happy way. And we arrive at an announcement day, which is when we announce the final Dapr release, and which means that all P0s have been cleared. There are no bugs that we know of for P0s or any security issues. And we basically announce that. So the dates for these are September 4th and September 5th. The next thing that I want you to take into consideration are feature proposals. So any major features in Dapr that touch more than one repository and or touch the Dapr APIs, component specifications, and or involve changes to multiple SDKs will find their place inside of our proposals repository, which you can find here. It's Dapr/proposals. This is an example of a proposal, and then we get the relevant maintainers to basically review it and vote on it. So if you're wondering what are the really big feature items in Dapr, go ahead and look at the proposals repository. We have, I think 11 outstanding issues there right now. Okay. So this is the list of priorities. If you're wondering what the Dapr maintainers are considering a priority for the release, please go over this list. Of course, we're not going to go over each and every single one of those, but you can do that yourself. If you have anything to add, if you have any concerns about the priorities, if you think something should be a priority, then again, please ping the maintainers or the release team, bring it on here so that we can take that into consideration. So really, any sort of feedback is greatly appreciated. And then if you're seeing features here, for example, that you really care about, it'd be really great if you went into the issue for that specific feature and just upvoted it. Why? Because it helps us maintainers triage what we think is more important to the community. All right, and these are the different repository milestones. So if you want to contribute to the milestone, that's really appreciated, first of all. And then second, depending on the area of interest to you, you can find issues that are labeled good first issue if you're a newcomer to Dapr, or you can just browse the different issues in the different milestones and pick the one where you think you can be the most impactful in. So, yeah, I suppose this is it. If there are any questions, we can take them now.
All right. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, hey, Tom.
Hi. I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times. Will Dapr workflow still be an alpha as part of the 1.12 release?
Yes. This is actually I think 1,000,001 question time that I've been asked this, but that's a really great question, actually. And the reason why it's a very timely question also is because we have been talking about this 2 days ago, and there is an effort underway, which is actually not part of the release milestone, to bring Dapr workflows to a beta state during 1.12. So we are going to be working on that. So if everything goes to plan, then workflows will no longer be an alpha API for 1.12. It'll become beta with the end goal of bringing it to a stable status for 1.13.
Sounds good.
Yes. Great. Now, what this means specifically is that we're going to make sure that the APIs are stable. So, you know, between 1.10 and 1.11, we've had breaking changes for the workflow APIs, for some of the responses, some of the SDKs have changed too. So a beta API can still have breaking changes, but in all likelihood, it's less likely to happen once an API is in beta. So at the very least, we want to be able to reach a point where we are all happy with how the APIs are defined, so that we can really coalesce around creating more workflow authoring SDKs with as little breaking changes as possible.
Second question is, how's it going on workflows in terms of early adapters? Are you getting a lot of traffic and a lot of interest? I assume you are.
Yes, for sure. I don't think there has been any other building block that's received that amount of attention, except for, you know, the 7 or 8 building blocks that Dapr had since it got started. So we've added several since Dapr 1.0, and I think workflows is definitely getting the most attention. That's based on my, you know, perspective.
Yeah, we really like the elegance of it. It's I think it's very, very simple to implement, even extend, and very scalable as well. So we look forward to using it.
That's awesome to hear. When you say scalable, or extensible, what do you mean by that?
Well, that's a really, really good question. Within our company, I mean, I don't want to say it's debate. I mean, the Dapr workflow in terms of creating workflows and activities is it's so easy to do that. I mean, it's pretty well abstracted, so you don't have to get into the nitty gritty plumbing. You kind of create your state store, and the durability and the resilience just kind of takes care of itself. All you basically have to do is define your business logic within workflows and activities. But we're in a situation where we kind of want to decouple the business logic from workflows, and we want to use the basic, templated abstractions of workflows and the different design patterns. But we kind of want to create kind of like a UI ability to create what I would call workflow schemas that are reusable, that basically connect all of the patterns kind of like Legos, and they're reusable, they're editable. You can create new ones without our implementation developers actually having to even know how workflows and activities work. All they have to do is just kind of create their business logic endpoints, and we want our framework to make callbacks, and basically use workflows as kind of a durable state machine, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that sounds like an appropriate extension.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, to be fully transparent, I asked you to, first of all, understand what you meant by extensible, and also I wanted to squeeze more compliments for Dapr workflows. So you've given me both. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope I hope I was clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then thus making it very scalable. I mean, once we can create schemas that we can probably save them back to a database, probably a relational database, and then at runtime construct, register everything and construct those workflow elements. I mean, you basically are unlimited, and you can even have people product people who know nothing about workflows, or even software for that matter, can create workflows. Is the ultimate idea.
Yeah, it's really interesting about extending workflows to like non-technical people. And I think what we want to take a look at in the future is to implement maybe a declarative model that builds on top of the programmatic one. So if you look at the CNCF serverless workflow specification, for example, they're trying to come up with like a standard API or a standard definition of a declarative workflow, and that might be interesting for Dapr just to look into and be able to translate that into the program model we have today.
Yeah, I've seen I think it's the serverless workflow specification, CNCF. I've seen the declarative, and I like that. I mean, we're probably going to stay away. I mean, making complex declarative kind of files, whether they're YAML or JSON, we're probably going to stay away from that because they're bug prone. The syntax is hard sometimes to. So really, if you can kind of just go into a web form or React app and actually create the actual templated workflows.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like the major problem with specifications is that if you don't have really good tooling to validate the schemas and how you're doing it, then you can get a lot of errors. They're really difficult to find out afterwards.
Yeah, your productivity starts going down. So yeah.
For sure.
But thank you for that information and feedback. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's always great to hear feedback of things that are important to you. And as always, as Yaron pointed out, dive into some of those issues, put comments on them. That's what we're really looking for. It's so important to hear people from the community talk about the things that they'd love to see inside Dapr. Any other questions on the roadmap and what's coming up in 1.12 before we move on?
Paul 42 has his hand up.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
We can, yes, go ahead.
Sorry to backtrack, but I also just wanted to say I also appreciate workflows just because it has been very useful in a prototyping with brownfield development, being able to put kind of error prone or flaky things into activities and then being able to get like the retries automatically and being able to kind of decouple things and have them more observable. I've been a really big fan of. I'm still kind of working on our final implementation, but I just want to say I'm a big fan of it.
All right, that's wonderful to hear. I think both of you are reflecting a lot of the feedback we're hearing from the community about how Dapr workflows is going to be very powerful, and we're very excited by it. So yeah, please keep sending this. Okay, any other comments or questions on 112? All right, so with that, let me move on here. As always, we do a little recap of what's happened in the last couple of weeks since the last community call, just in terms of what's happening inside the community. We just tend to draw out some of the articles that people have published. Martino did a couple of great deep dives into secrets management and how you use resiliency with Dapr. It's certainly worth checking those out. If you want a little Dapr overview, both Jürgen and Husafa did these overview sessions. Aaron is doing a series of Open Up Microsoft about using Dapr. The last one he did in there about Dapr resiliency is pretty good, about how you can bind the Dapr resiliency policies with the different APIs. I would certainly go and listen to that video. Vipin did a little overview of how you use the AKS extension with Dapr. And then Will finished up here with a couple of ASP.NET Core combined with Dapr state management and how you using cron jobs. All great articles published. The links will be included here as part of the slide deck you can download afterwards. Just in terms of sessions that people have given, Tobias gave this one at the .NET user group. And I don't know if it's recorded. I'll have to find out the link for this afterwards. Will did this one diving down on unleashing the power of microservices, basically focusing on Azure Container Apps and Dapr combined together. And you can go and check out his YouTube video on this. And then talking of workflow, Mark Duquier updated all of the workflow samples and the labs inside Diagrid Labs to have the latest features that were released as part of the 1.11 release for workflow, including purge and the other APIs inside there for activation of workflows when they've gone into for external events. So you can go and check out those demos, go and check out his APIs inside there, and give them a try out for more workflow. Dapr plays nice with all technologies, and look, Dapr plus Orleans, an interesting talk by Microsoft Reactor from Victor. Interesting to see how that played together. If you need more Mauricio, there is plenty more of him. The talk we just gave on test containers and Dapr. He also did a deeper dive more with Oleg from Atomic Jar about the background around test containers. If you want to listen to more in depth about what Mauricio covered today. And then finally, we have an upcoming session where myself and Mikhailov are going to do an overview of Dapr and dive into some of the background and some of the case studies around this, all along with Alice here. Oh, and not quite finally, Mark Duquier is building a game of Dapr. If you need to enjoy yourself and go back to the 80s and live the retro life it is. So I'm sure he'll dive into this more a little bit in the next call and talk a little bit more about what he's building. But you can now live Dapr through the game that he's going to publish, and hopefully have it out before the end of the year. As always, join us on our Dapr Discord. That's the place to answer questions, ask more about features, our roadmap, dive into issues. And as always, if you have a show and tell that you want to come on to the call with and present, we'd love to have people from the community come here. And with that, I'll leave it for any questions that people have to ask finally across any of these topics or anything else for that matter. And we'll open it up. Feel free to put your hand up, or if not, we will kind of move on. So any topics that people would like to cover at the end here? Okay, well, thank you for having us today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.